You checked the numbers 3 times last night. Not because they changed, because you needed to be sure you had not. Every leader has a version of the room they rehearse alone. The door still closed, the coffee going cold, the first real decision of the day already made before anyone watched you make it. It is what nobody says out loud. The hardest part of the meeting happens before you open that door. And but by the time most leaders sit down, the capacity the room needs from them is already spent. Why does the day feel lost before it starts? That's today's conversation. Welcome to the AI Cafe Conversations podcast. I'm Sahar Andrade. This is where the neuroscience of pressure meets the future of leadership. Before we go anywhere, the thing I say every week, everything I share comes from my experience and my opinion as a coach. It's not a diagnosis and it's not a fact about you. You decide what fits now. Let me give you the answer up front because I don't think you have the patience today for a slow reveal, and I don't blame you. The day feels lost before it starts because the day starts earlier than the calendar says it does. Not at 9, not at the first meeting. It starts in the car. Actually, before that, it starts in the shower. Actually, before that, it starts at 5:40 in the morning when the mind opens the same file it closed at midnight and runs it again. By the time a leader walks into the first meeting, dozens of decisions have already been made. Small ones, invisible ones, none of them on an agenda. And every one of them spent something. That is the whole episode in 3 sentences. Now let me show you the machinery underneath that, because once you see it, you stop reaching for the wrong explanation and start treating it as a volume problem you actually have power over. Let me describe a morning, not one person's morning, the composite I hear over and over and over from executives. And if you have sat in that chair, you will recognize the shape of it. The alarm goes off, and the review has already started. Not the meeting review, the self review. What I said Tuesday, how it landed, whether the silence after meant agreement or something else. Then the phone. 3 messages that each contain a decision delivered as a question. Can we push the launch? Do you want me to tell them or do you want to? Are we still doing the offsite? Then come the numbers. Opened again. Not because anything moved, because certainty needs to be manufactured before it can be performed. By 8:15, the leader has processed a threat to the business, rehearsed the room, absorbed 4 requests, and cleared maybe 6 small choices. And the first meeting has not even started. Here is what I want you to notice about that list. Almost none of it is leadership. I'm sure all of you, including myself, went through some form of it at a certain time. What is happening here is absorption. Somewhere along the way, the role became a place where other people unfinished thinking gets deposited, and the leader became the processor of last resort. Leaders describe this to me in almost the same words every time. Not, I am stressed, something more specific. By the time I get to the actual decision, there is nothing left to bring to it. And here is the part that lands hardest. They read that sentence as evidence about themselves. It's evidence about volume. This is not a discipline problem, it's a load problem. And in 2026, the load has a new engine bottled into it. Let me talk about AI, because this is where the conversation gets honest. Deloitte's 2026 Global Human Capital Trend Survey, built with Oxford Economics across more than 9,000 businesses and HR leaders in 89 countries, found that 60% of executives now regularly use AI to support the decisions. 60%. 2 years ago, that number would have been a rounding error. Now, hold that next to what the tools were sold as: less work, fewer decisions, more room to think. In March of 2026, Boston Consulting Group published a study in Harvard Business Review. 1,488 full-time American workers. They measured mental effort, mental fatigue, information overload, error rates, and intent to quit against how people actually used AI. Not how they said they felt about it, how they used it. What they found? The people carrying heavy oversight of AI tools reported 14% more mental effort, 12% more mental fatigue, and 19% more information overload than people carrying light oversight. 19% more information overload from the tools that were supposed to reduce it. The researchers gave the state a name. They call it AI brain fry. Their definition is mental fatigue for use or oversight of AI beyond a person's cognitive capacity. The people living it described as buzzing feeling, mental fog, slower decisions, headaches. And this is the line I would underline twice if there was a document instead of a conversation. 14% of AI users in that study reported it. In marketing segments, 26%. And the people reporting it also reported 33% more decision fatigue and 39% more major errors. So follow the sequence here. The tool arrives to remove work. The tool produces output. The output has to be checked. Checking is a decision. Every check is a decision. And now there are 11 of them before the first meeting instead of 6. Let me make that concrete because abstractions do not change behavior. A leader opens the laptop at 7:20. There is a summary of yesterday's customer calls generated overnight. There is a draft of the reorganization memo generated by someone else's tool. There is a forecast with a confidence range attached to it. And the range is wide enough that the range itself is a decision. There is a flag compliance item that may or may not be a real flag. 4 artifacts. None of them existed 3 years ago. Every one of them arrives with the same silent question attached. Do you trust this? And how much? The question is the load, not the reading, the trusting. Because here is what nobody accounted for when these tools rolled in. A human draft comes with a human you can calibrate. You know that this person overstates and that person varies the bad news in paragraph 4. You have 20 years of calibration data on them. An AI draft comes with none of that. So every artifact gets evaluated from scratch every morning. And the evaluation happens in the same private hour where the rehearsal already lives. That is the AI integration problem in most organizations right now. And it's not technical. Judgment forms slower than information arrives. The tooling is fine. The capacity to absorb what the tooling produces was never funded. The load did not get smaller, it got faster and it got quieter. It moved from things you can point to on a calendar into a category nobody schedules and nobody counts. Which brings me to the mechanism. And I'm going to be careful here because I would rather you trust me than be impressed by me. The mechanism is decision fatigue. And the popular version of it is wrong. The story most people have heard is that willpower is like fuel in a tank, that it drains through the day, that glucose is the fuel. The version came out of a research in the late 90s and it dominated for 2 decades. Then it was tested properly. In 2016, 23 laboratories ran a pre-registered replication for over 2,000 participants. The effect came back statistically indistinguishable from zero. A second large multi-lab attempt in 2019, more than 3,000 participants found the same nothing. So the fuel tank is not the mechanism. In my opinion, a physician who keeps repeating a debunked model because it makes a nice metaphor is not educating anyone. Here is what survived the wreckage, and it's the part that matters for the person listening to this. Decision quality degrades as decision volume climbs. Not because a tank empties, because switching between decisions has a cost, and that cost accumulates, and the accumulations shows up as narrower thinking, faster shortcuts, and a strong preference for whatever option requires the least from you next. I'm gonna say that again. Decision quality degrades as decision volume climbs, not because a tank empties, but because switching between decisions has a cost, and that cost accumulates, and the accumulation shows up as a narrower thinker, faster shortcuts. And a strong preference for whatever option requires the least from you next. There is also a finding out of Carol Dweck's lab that I think about constantly. People who believe mental capacity is strictly limited show the classic decline after demanding work. People who do not hold that belief show much less of it. Expectation shapes the curve. That is not a permission slip to grind. It's a warning about the story we tell ourselves at 8:15 in the morning. If a leader has already decided the day is spent, guess what will happen? The day will behave accordingly. Now let me be specific about what this costs, because in my experience, the cost is never where leaders think it is. They think the cost is exhaustion. Exhaustion is the receipt, not the purchase. The first cost is order. The most consequential decision of the day almost never sits in the first spot. It sits at 2 in the afternoon, or in the last 10 minutes of a meeting that ran long, or in a hallway. So the decisions that shape a quarter get made with whatever is left after the decisions that shaped nothing. Nobody designed that. Everybody lives it. The second cost is the small choices. This is the tell I listen for, and it's almost never mentioned in a coaching conversation until I ask directly. Decision fatigue does not announce itself in the boardroom. It shows up when choosing lunch feels like too much, when picking a restaurant becomes an imposition, when someone asks what movie and the honest answer is, I cannot do one more of these today. Leaders hear that in themselves and reach for a word like discipline. Wrong department. It's arithmetic, showing up in the least important place first, because the important places still have adrenaline propping them up. The third cost is the room. And this is the one with the price tag on it. Under high load, the range of options a person can hold narrows. Fewer alternatives get considered. The first workable answer starts to look like the best answer. Dissent starts to feel like delay instead of data. Volume narrows range. That is the whole story, and volume was never budgeted. So go back to that BCG number, 39% more major errors among people in that state. That is not a wellness statistic. That is a business statistic wearing a wellness costume. The fourth cost is the one leaders pay in private. And it's the reason I built the work I built. There is no peer. Advisors exist, coaches exist, boards exist, but almost nobody sits where a given leader sits with the full context at the same altitude on the same day. So the highest stakes thinking gets done with no one to test it against. And the rehearsal in the closed office is a leader trying to run a peer review with only one participant available. That is expensive in a way no dashboard captures. And the fifth cost lands on the team, whether anyone intends it or not. Teams do not read strategy decks for signal. They read faces. So when a leader walks in already spent, the team receives a version of that leader that is shorter, flatter, and quicker to close conversations. The team does not conclude the boss is tired. The team concludes something is wrong and nobody is saying it. Then they do their own math. On the same BCG data, the workers reporting that overloaded state also reported 39% higher intent to quit. So the sequence completes itself. Load arrives before the day. Load spends the leader. The spent leader leads a narrower room. The room reads the narrowing and starts protecting itself. And 6 months later, somebody calls it an engagement problem and buys a survey. Though it's just a toxic cycle, like I just read it. Load arrives before the day. Load spends the leader. The spent leader leads a narrower room. The room reads the narrowing and starts protecting itself. And then they call it engagement in 6 months. And I want to sit in that word for a second because it's the most useful word in this episode. Math is checkable. Math can be shown to someone. Math is not an accusation about anyone's character, but almost nothing in this system is built to display it. There is no line item on any dashboard for decisions absorbed, no column for artifacts evaluated, no field where a leader can enter the number of times they were asked to convert someone else's uncertainty into a yes or a no before 9 in the morning. So the load stays invisible, and invisible loads get attributed to people. The leader looks at the team and thinks, they do not see how much lands on me. The team looks up and thinks, management does not understand what we are carrying. And by the way, I hear it all the time. Both readings are accurate. Both are reading the same missing number from opposite ends. And because the number doesn't exist anywhere, each slide fills the gap with a story about the other side's comment. And commitment. That is how two groups of people who are both strained end up describing each other as the problem. I have watched that dynamic run inside organizations that had on paper everything they needed to succeed. Good people, real strategy, funded plan, and a load nobody was measuring, quietly converting competence into friction. So what actually changes this? Or what can we do about this? It's not more discipline, not an earlier alarm. Please, definitely not an earlier alarm. What changes, it's treating decision volume as a real budget, the way a leader already budgets money and headcount. You would never let 11 people spend from one account with no cap and no reporting. That is exactly the most executive mornings are. Here is the direction, and I'm giving you the thinking rather than the full protocol because the protocol is what we do live in the room. First, the first 2 hours belong to one decision, and you name it from the night before. One decision, not a list. One. The highest consequence decision available to you tomorrow. It gets the front of the day before the absorber starts. And it gets made when the arithmetic is still in your favor. Everything else in that window waits. Not forever, until 11. Second, convert repeated decisions into rules. You know how we do now with AI, like with Claude, if I do something repetitively, I just create a skill so I don't have to repeat myself anymore? Same principle. Every decision that shows up more than twice a month is not a decision. It's a policy you have not written yet. Travel approvals under a certain number. Which meetings you decide by default. Who gets an answer today and who gets an answer Thursday. Every rule you write removes an item from the account permanently. This is the single biggest win available to most executives, and almost nobody does it. Because writing the rule feels like less work than making a decision, and it's not. It's the same work done once. 3 examples so it does not stay theoretical. 1. Any spend under a set number does not come to you. Somebody else owns it, and they own the outcome too. You will lose a small amount of control and recover an hour of week in thinking. 2. Any request that arrives after 4 in the afternoon gets answered tomorrow, unless a customer is actively affected. Not because the request does not matter, because the version of you available at 4:30 is not the version that should be answering that request. 3. Any AI output that touches an external audience gets one review by one named person at one scheduled time. Not 4 people glancing at it across 9 hours in a thread. One pass, one owner, done. Every rule like that is a decision you will never make again. And decisions you never make again are the only kind that stay removed. Third, and this is the AI piece, and it's the opposite of what most people expect me to say. I'm not going to tell you to use fewer tools. I'm going to tell you, change what you use them for. Go back to the BCG findings. Perceived productivity climbed from 1 tool to 2, kept climbing at 3, and then fell as tools stacked beyond that. And the group carrying the heaviest cognitive cost was not the group using AI most. It was the group supervising AI most. Read that again. The cost was in the watching, not in the using. And here is the counterweight in the same research. When AI took over generally routine work, people reported less burnout, not more. Higher engagement, better connection with the people around them. So the question stops being how much AI. It becomes one question as per task. Am I delegating this or am I babysitting this? Delegation returns capacity. Supervision consumes it. Most executives, in my experience, have quietly built a supervision job on top of the job they already had. And nobody in the organization has noticed because it happens in the same place all the other invisible load happens before the door opens. And the gap is not a secret. In the same Deloitte 2026 Global Human Capital Trends report, 60% of executives use AI in decision making, and only 5% say they manage it well. 60 in, 5 managing it. This is not a technology gap. That is an unbudgeted load showing up as accountability problem. Pick one workflow this week where you are checking output you do not actually need to check. Stop checking it or stop using the tool for it. Either answer returns something to the account. Fourth, get one person who can hold the context, not a direct report, not a spouse who inherits the whole day at 7 in the evening. Someone at a comparable attitude who can hear the thinking and push back on it. When leaders describe the moment they came back to themselves, another human being is almost always in the room. That pattern is so consistent that I stopped treating it as a nice idea and started building around it. This is the part where I will name the deeper framework once and then leave it alone. The full method I take executive through is BRAIN, and it exists to rebuild access to steady judgment under load rather than to add another practice on top of an overloaded day. That is all I'm going to say about it here, because it's not a free content thing and I would rather under promise than perform. What I will say plainly is the belief underneath all of that. Steady before strategy. Steady before strategy. Not because steadiness is pleasant, because the strategy formed inside a spent morning is a worse strategy and it costs the same amount to execute a good one. Now I can hear the objection. I can hear it almost every room I stand in, and I would be doing you a disservice if I pretended it was not reasonable. You're thinking, Sahar, I do not have time to sort the load before the day starts. The sorting is the load. You're asking me to add a step to a morning that is already the problem. Fair. But here is my answer, and it's not reassurance. You're not adding a step. You are moving one. The sorting is already happening. It's happening at 5:40 in the morning with no structure, no order, and no cap. It's happening in the shower and in the car and in the 4 minutes before the first call. The cost already being paid. What's missing is any return on it. 10 minutes of deliberate sorting does not add 10 minutes to the load. It replaces 90 minutes of unstructured sorting with 10 minutes of structured sorting. And it does it before the volume climbs, which is the only window where the arithmetic still favors you. And the second half of the answer is harder. If it's generally true that there is no room anywhere in the day to name one decision, that is not time management finding. That is capacity finding. And it's information about the design of the role, not about the person filling it, which is a different conversation. Usually, the one nobody above you has invited. Here is what I want you to do with this. Once a month, I open a live room. It's called the Pressure Room, and it's 45 minutes working session on Zoom, where executives work on leading under pressure. It's not a webinar with a pitch at the end. One model taught properly, one thing to practice, and a room of people carrying the same load who are willing to say so out loud. Session 2 is Thursday, August 27th at 11 a.m. Pacific. 45 minutes free. Registered at saharandrade.com/pressure-room. That is saharandrade.com/pressure-room. And I'm going to have it also in here in the notes of this podcast. If you take one thing from today, take this. The day is not lost before it starts. It's spent before it starts. Those are different problems. And the second one has a budget you can actually see. Name tomorrow's decisions tonight. Write one rule this week. Ask one honest question about what you are supervising that do not need to supervise. Thank you for spending this time with me. Leadership does not fail. Nervous system do. Before I leave, show me some love. Rate, comment, subscribe, or share our podcast. Thank you for your support. You had made us one of the top 2% global podcasts. I really appreciate it. Till I see you on Friday for the short podcast of the Forbes article. Peace.